My friends, welcome. Welcome to this place. Here we search for truth and understanding. Here we celebrate life and contemplate its mysteries. We share healing and we share wholeness. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you come from, we welcome you to this congregation. And now I would invite David Maxon to lead us in our chalice lighting.
Good morning. This is a chalice lighting for when things aren't okay by Molly Brewer. My beloved people, I cannot pretend, and so I will not tell you that everything is okay right now, that there is no reason to be angry, that you must be optimistic or at peace. I cannot pretend these things, and so I won't tell them to you. But now our chalice is lit, and so I ask, in this moment, that we remember the words of Rebecca Parker. There is a love. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all. By the light of our chalice, let us rest in this love.
Well, the great American author and fellow Unitarian Universalist Kurt Vonnegut once told his wife he was going out to buy an envelope. "Oh," she says, "well, you're not a poor man, so why don't you go online and buy 100 envelopes and put them in the closet?" And so I pretend not to hear her. And I go out and get an envelope because I'm going to have a hell of a good time in the process of buying one envelope. I meet a lot of people and see some great-looking babies, and a fire engine goes on by, and I give them the thumbs up. And I'll ask a woman what kind of dog that is. And I don't know. The moral of the story is, we're here on Earth to fart around. And of course, the computers will do us out of that. And what the computer people don't realize, or they don't care, is that we're dancing animals. We love to move around. And it's like we're not supposed to dance at all anymore. Kurt Vonnegut's perspective could not be more relevant during these past 7 months of social distancing, of isolation, and fear. As he says, What happens when we can't fart around anymore? I mean, what happens when we can't go for that stroll in the park and gawk at that fire truck going by? When we can't scratch behind the ears of that puppy? What happens when we can't play peekaboo with a baby? I mean, what happens when we're not allowed to dance with one another anymore? Well, we lose an inherent part of what makes us all human. I'd like to tell you a story of how this pandemic has affected me. Last spring, in late May, after 3 months of lockdown, I'd had enough. I mean, the novelty of working from home had worn off. That perverse excitement of reading every day about this new novel coronavirus and how it was wreaking havoc across the globe, that was gone. During March and April, it had almost seemed like the virus was out there somewhere, over there. Just something that I heard about on the radio. But now, in late May, it was beginning to come a little too close for home. Many of us were now losing our jobs. We were getting furloughed. I was hearing about mothers and aunts and co-workers who had tested positive, some right in this congregation. About family and nursing homes who we couldn't touch or hug anymore, but instead we had to visit through a pane glass window. Even some of us had severe symptoms that sure seemed like COVID, but there simply weren't enough tests, so we couldn't say for sure. My daughter's online learning was not going well. For last spring, all they were given were assignments to do all by themselves online. And then to have maybe 1 hour a week on Zoom with their teacher. It was certainly not enough to keep my inquisitive and very social daughters engaged. I could see them really beginning to struggle. By late May, I knew I had only a few more worship services to lead, so I began to let my guard down. I could feel my energy beginning to drain away. I mean, this was not fun anymore. This was not going to be simply a few unusual months of lockdown like our leaders had promised us. No, like it or not, we were all in for the long haul. Summer plans were being canceled, and the world seemed like it was falling apart, piece by piece by piece. And as a result, I could feel myself slipping into a depression. And to make matters worse, we discovered that at that time we had a mouse living in our house. Well, to be honest, we probably had more than one mouse, but see, the four of us in my family, we had been staying home all of the time now for 3 months, which meant, of course, more dirty dishes, more half-eaten sandwiches left on the counter. To be honest, we are not the cleanest family in the world. Typically, we really only clean up in depth when we know we have company coming over. Well, we certainly didn't have company coming over those days. So we let the things slide, and the mice knew it. My daughters, with all of their spare time, since school was basically not really happening, had taken it upon themselves to research and build multiple different types of mousetraps. I would often find my youngest frantically searching through YouTube for new mousetrap ideas. I mean, sure, maybe we couldn't make the coronavirus go away. Maybe we couldn't make school start up again and see our friends. Maybe we couldn't hug and love up grandma. But darn it, we were going to catch that mouse. And I was just thankful that my daughters had finally found something to keep them busy. They tried that trapdoor water bottle on a string mouse trap. They tried the pan balanced on a stick connected to a string mouse trap. They even tried that long ramp up the top of a bucket of doom mouse trap. Well, after a few days, I told them that I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go and buy mouse poison to take care of the situation once and for all. They pleaded with me not to kill the mice. You're a murderer, they called me. So I gave in and I let them try for a few more weeks. But now, every night while our kitchen was rigged with various homemade mouse traps, with almonds tantalizing those mice on a long ramp, or that cantilevered bridge over a tall bucket, or a carefully balanced pan over a juicy piece of cheese. I remember sitting in our dark living room after everyone had gone to bed, hearing the mice start to explore. And to be totally honest, mice kind of freak me out. So every night while sitting in that dark house and hearing the mice scamper and scratch about in the kitchen, it all just filled me with anxiety. And I remember feeling almost paralyzed as this went on for weeks and weeks. You know, everything in the world then seemed like it was falling apart. And now, even my own home was not safe. In a way, you know, the mice became a projection of all of my internal fears and anxieties about this new dystopian reality we were living in. Would I become sick with COVID? Would my mom, who already has lung cancer, die if she happened to get COVID? Would my wife lose her job since her job was deemed non-essential? Would we ever be able to hug our friends and family ever again? And all of these very real fears were swirling around in my head. And instead of feeling like in that moment I could rise to the occasion and overcome adversity, all I felt now was depressed, unable to move, stuck on the couch, with mice invading my home. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Well, it should, because according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, during late June of 2020, 31% of U.S. adults reported struggling with anxiety or depression. 26% reported stressor-related or trauma disorder symptoms. 13% started or increased substance abuse. 11% even seriously considered suicide. It's no surprise that all of the increases in stress, physical isolation, fear of illness and death, social unrest and upheaval, and unpredictable and incompetent leadership during a crisis, they all played a very significant toll on all of us and all of our mental health. And for me, it brought out something I have struggled with since puberty, my bipolar disorder. See, for the past 30 years, I have learned to live with going through highs and lows several times each year. And you know, I'm lucky because typically my condition is not as severe as some. I've never needed to be medicated, but instead I usually have been able to manage this through good self-care, eating well, sleeping enough, meditating, exercising. Problem is that sometimes I do not always practice good self-care. Sometimes the outside stressors in my life get the best of me. And last spring, I was finding the world very difficult to deal with. You know, I say this as your minister, knowing that some of you might now be judgmental of me, knowing that some of you perhaps might worry about my ability to minister to you if I am not always mentally healthy. I'm well aware of the stigma that still surrounds mental health. But after thinking and praying about this long and hard, I came to the conclusion that while sharing this side of myself might be risky, the bigger risk is to just say nothing. Because for far too long, we have been told that these problems are things that we should suffer alone. We've been told to keep quiet about our mental health and instead pay someone to listen to our problems behind closed doors and to pretend that everything is okay to everyone else. Don't believe me? Just take a peek at Facebook and everyone else's pages as they pretend that everything is okay. Well, my friends, I'm here to tell you that, of course, today everything is not okay. There are unprecedented things happening in our world and in our lives right now. And if you are feeling overwhelmed, anxious, depressed, angry, stressed out, or even suicidal, you are not alone. If you are coping by going to the bottle, to the bong, or to the medicine cabinet, you are not alone. If you feel alone, isolated, just in need of some physical contact, you are not alone. And we're all struggling through this time in one way or another. In fact, I would argue that there is actually no divider between those who are deemed mentally ill and everyone else. Now, listen, I am no psychologist, but in my experience in talking with many of you as your minister, we all exhibit troubling mental health symptoms at various times in our lives and in varying degrees. We all have our own demons we are dealing with. None of us are ever fully mentally healthy. That's okay. That's real. The problem is that our society has taught us that we are not to publicly acknowledge our own mental health issues. We are to be ashamed of these feelings, to keep them completely hidden. And imagine if we did this with other medical issues. Imagine if we were so ashamed when we broke our leg that we failed to get a cast. Imagine if we thought that our cancer was our own fault and we should keep it quiet. Imagine if we told no one about our COVID symptoms in fear that they would judge us. Well, that's exactly what we do with mental health. Well, anyhow, let me get back to my story, back to last June. It had now been several weeks of multiple prototypes of mouse traps and mouse scratching every night until one night my wife shrieked from the kitchen. We had finally, after weeks of trying, caught a mouse. Yes, indeed, our cantilevered bridge with a juicy almond dangling over the precipice into that bucket of doom mousetrap had finally worked. The girls woke up, they came running out and were giddy with joy. We couldn't believe it actually worked after so many failures. So we sealed the bucket and all four of us got in the car in our pajamas and drove to a nearby park, and we let the mouse go. It was indeed a momentous night. But as I watched that mouse scamper into the darkness, that mouse that had become a symbol for me of all of my anxiety and fear, I could feel something somehow lift from my shoulders. Somehow, I felt better about life. Maybe it was being surrounded by my wonderful family. Maybe it was all of us standing outside in our pajamas in the middle of the night, but it felt like a weight had been lifted. The following days were filled with laughter and heroic stories shared with grandparents over Zoom of the multiple failed mousetrap designs, the perseverance, the patience, until finally we were successful. I mean, maybe, just maybe, things weren't so bad. Now, of course, nothing had really changed in our lives. School was still out for who knows how long. The coronavirus was still running rampant. People were still protesting in the streets. But this small success in our lives, catching and releasing just one small mouse, somehow made us all feel better. But somehow, no matter how bad things are out there, we at least had control over this one thing right here. So friends, my prayer for all of you during these times when nothing is easy and all of us are hurting in one way or another is to try to remember that you are not alone. We here at First Parish are here for you because we know what it feels like to be afraid, to be isolated, to be depressed. So I would ask you to take a minute right now and look around at all those other faces you see on your Zoom screen. For those are faces of people who care about you. They care about you. Faces of old friends or maybe new friends who you haven't yet met. Those are faces of folks who understand what you are going through because they've been through it too. It won't be easy, but we will get through this together. Even if together we have to build a better mousetrap. For here at First Parish, we take care of each other, especially when times are hard. For friends, that is what we do. Amen.